I'm ready when you are.
Yeah, I'm good. I didn't prepare any kind of jokes or anything. You got a lead in you want to do?
I mean, I feel like the scene itself is...
The scene itself is the joke.
It's the joke.
Prepare for your destruction.
Look, Darth, you remember... I'm going to ask this question and know that there's no correct answer to this. Do you remember the scene in The Rise of Skywalker where our heroes crash land the Millennium Falcon and then take their Goonies dagger to find the throne room among the wreckage of the Death Star?
Yep. One of the most memorable and made fun of scenes in the entire film. Possibly the entire trilogy.
I'm going to be completely honest. I don't remember anything that happens in that last movie. Like, I went into it. We saw it in the cinema, like the night before the premiere, like the pre-screening. I definitely saw all of it. Like, I didn't leave the cinema to pee or anything, but I do not remember anything that happens. So when you were like, hey, we should do this scene, I was like, the what? And I YouTubed it. What the? And then I fell down a rabbit hole, is what happened. Then I was like, I need to know everything about how this came to be. What, like, because I don't remember the origin of this thing. So for those who don't necessarily recall, which I'm assuming is everybody that saw that film, basically the setup is that, and correct me if I get any of these Star Wars facts wrong, because as we know, fake fan. So the basic setup is that our heroes need to find Exegol, which is a hidden Sith planet where the resurrected Palpatine has been building an army for the last 20 years. And in order to do that, they need to find a Sith Wayfinder, which is basically a fancy space GPS. And the way that they're going to do this is they've located a dagger, the blade of Ochi of Bastoon. And Ochi of Bastoon was a relic hunter and assassin that worked for Palpatine, who was responsible for killing Rey's parents, I believe. Anyway, on this dagger, in the Sith language, he has encoded the coordinates, I guess, to the Wayfinder. And then not only that, but he has built in like a concealed Goonies style, like it's a protractor basically.
Right?
Like it's a protractor, but for Death Star wreckage. So this implies that 13 years before the events of this film, 13 years before the Force Awakens, rather, this dude who's like an assassin and a relic hunter and like a real badass dude has like sat on this particular hill and crafted a protractor that is the exact outline and shape of the wreckage from that particular spot. And our heroes just so happen to walk down the hill, and Rey thinks to open the protractor, and then they work out that it's that the Wayfinder's in the throne room, which is the first place you should have checked anyway. Like, it's not like they're like, oh, what was in corridor 2733.92 on level 500. Like, it's the place where Sidious kept all his shit. It's not. Yeah, so anyway, that's the setup for this scene. Talk to me, Darth. What did you think?
Well, initially, one thing that you just mentioned that I had never thought about before was the fact that yes, someone had to be there ahead of time to map out the wreckage so that they could then carve that into the dagger. But it's not like that happened there. Like, they had to go to a metalworker to make the dagger, so they had to take a piece of paper and sketch out, like, I want it to look like this. It has to have this exact curve, or they had to take a picture of the wreckage,
Well, they don't have photographs, do they? I guess they could take a hologram.
Yeah.
Well, no, so I'm gonna well actually you on Star Wars for once. So I believe the dagger existed no, you're right. Okay, sorry. No, when you're right. So the dagger had to be created after the crash of the second Death Star, before Rey's parents were killed.
The thing is, they make it sound like it's supposed to be this really ancient relic, and that the language written on it is like the super ancient language of the Sith. Therefore, the thing should be thousands of years old, but there's no way for it to be carved in the form of wreckage that didn't happen, 12 years before that. Like,
yeah, it's like it's at most maybe like 15 years old at this point.
Yeah, and
which is wild.
Yeah. Like the number of things that don't make sense about this scene is just like absolutely staggering. And we could probably say the same thing about the original Goonies thing. Like, if he was standing 5 feet to the left, would it have worked? No. But same thing. But
why? So this is what I wanted to really get into, is like, why does it feel like it works in the Goonies, whereas here it feels so canny and like unrealistic? Do you know what I mean? Like, there is some material difference in and maybe it's probably a combination of things, right? It's probably a genre thing combined with the type of story it's in, combined with like just the other apparatus in this film, which is like, it's a bad film, and like it's a bad story, and like that doesn't help. It's kind of what Rye always talks about, where it's like, if you're in the story and like you're buying into it, this stuff doesn't ping as weird.
Yeah.
But because the rest of the story is so kind of clunky and staggering, when it does happen, you're like, oh, this again. I can't believe there's another one of these,
Yeah, I was gonna say the exact same thing about the genre making such a big difference, because like Goonies was a happy-go-lucky, for the most part, kids movie. It's not supposed to be serious. It's something that you could kind of say, oh yeah, that doesn't really make sense, but it's okay. It's not supposed to be like a serious thing, and not necessarily that, Star Wars is supposed to be super serious sci-fi that always tracks logically, because we started having that discussion that it's much more of a fantasy, that the science does not make sense most of the time, and the creators don't try to make the science make sense most of the time. But in this case, it was just so blatantly weird that it just pulls you out of the story. They probably could have taken the same scene, the same concept, and approached it a little differently. Like, maybe if the writing on the dagger had the literal coordinates for where to stand, and like the literal coordinates for or the degree to hold the dagger. It reminds me of The Hobbit. It's like, stand on where the thrush knocks and you'll see the keyhole. Like, if it had given exact instructions for what to do, you wouldn't have had the trouble believing it.
That's interesting. That's a really interesting point. Yeah, and like you could almost have it be a riddle. Let me find what is written on the dagger. Hang on, because someone has the example of Sith. Hang on, Sith. I did have this written down before. I did take notes. I don't know that we ever learn. We don't learn specifically what's written on the dagger.
Yeah. If you'll look up like what does C-3PO say in Ancient Sith?
3PO.
Because remember, they have to like reprogram his brain for him to read what's on the dagger, because he refuses to for whatever reason.
That's right. C-3PO is very hard to spell, by the way. That took me a good few tries.
The Emperor's Wayfinder is in the Imperial Vault at Delta 36, transient 936, bearing 32, on a moon in the Endor system. From the southern shore, only this blade tells.
So, that's what it says, by the way. That was me reading the quote. So, your point that you made earlier, which I think is really important, which is in The Hobbit, which is, again, kind of a similar fantasy, kind of a bit more like storybook logic, a bit less kind of fantasy like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, but in a certain sense, you're absolutely right, which is this is classic Star Wars. It does the thing it needed to do, but in a language that you can't fucking understand as the viewer. And no one at any point gives you this riddle and is like, isn't that an interesting riddle for us to solve? From the southern shore, only this blade and why is it coordinates? Why isn't it just a riddle? Why isn't it like, because, okay, I'm guessing, and again, Star Wars, well, actually, me if I get this wrong, but I'm guessing the reason it's in Sith language is so that if it just gets into the hands of, like, Johnny Bloggs, Star Wars dude, they can't read it and, like, work out where the Wayfinder is, right?
I mean, theoretically, I would assume if I were writing this that what they were thinking was that they only wanted Sith to be able to find the Sith home world. So if this dagger was indeed, 3,000 years old, and it was a relic passed among other Sith, then if one of them maybe came to the Sith tradition and had never been to the home world, he sees this dagger, he reads the message on it, he now knows roughly how to get to the home world. So take off all of the other data about tracking the Death Star and all that other kind of stuff. So the idea of an inscription on a Sith dagger could make a lot of sense. But for what they presented in the story, Uchi had to have carved this dagger himself after seeing the wreckage himself. And but the purpose is what? Like, that's, the same thing that Rai is talking about is why. Like, what is the purpose of him wanting to carve this dagger? Who is he trying to lead to Exegol?
Well, I don't think he's trying to lead anyone to Exegol. I think he's just taking notes. I think he's literally writing. This is his like A4 binder. Like, this is him being like, I need to write down where this freaking wayfinder is in case I forget. It's in the most memorable location. It's the throne room of the second crash. You're not just gonna forget. Like, it's just, this is my. So I okay. Yes, we've been talking a little bit about like, yeah, the purpose of the dagger existing is fucking buck wild. But then, because I can't think of why else he would do it other than because, let's just think this through, because he stashes the Wayfinder there so that if he gets caught by the Jedi or whoever or whatever, doing all of his relic hunting and assassinating, the Wayfinder doesn't fall into the hands of like the good guys who will find the Sith homeworld, or like you said, just like non-Sith heaps, right?
Yeah.
So the reason that he stashed the Wayfinder is for that reason. But if I was like, and hear me out, because I feel like I'd be a pretty bad Sith. Like, I'd get killed real quick. There'd be like, there could only be two, and then there'd be like, I'm like the third one in the dunce in the corner, where they're like, there can only be two, and this fucking guy who just won't leave. But I think if I was a Sith, bounty hunter working directly for Palpatine, who I know is alive, but no one else knows is alive, who is making Snoke's in a tube, which also happens in this film. If I was that guy and my boss, who again, like Sith demigod, Darth Sidious, is like, hey homie, when you get back, hide the coordinates to my Wayfinder so that no one else can come find me. And hide it somewhere that A, you'll remember, and B, no one will think to look. The one place I wouldn't put it is the bedroom of where my boss used to live. That's the first place anyone would check. Like, what? It just, because you don't need to write down the coordinates to remember it, because you put it in the first place anyone would think to check, which is a terrible hiding place. So like, there's so many, it doesn't work from any side. There's no direction that this works from. But the reason for it is so multi-layered that I don't think it's as simple as scene bad, dagger dumb. Because in the Goonies, and again, I'm trying to work backwards to at least give this film some credit. In the Goonies, it's a similar kind of thing where the assumption is this thing's been around for a while, but the truth is like possibly this tool or this coincidence, like we can forgive it because of the type of story it is. And in fact, Lord of the Rings makes fun of this later where, it's a really great joke actually in the first Lord of the Rings film where they are trying to get into the Mines of Moria, and Gandalf and the Fellowship come upon this huge door, and they read this riddle etched in Elven, and it's like, speak friend and enter. And they spend like hours trying to puzzle out this riddle and like try to like outsmart this like Goonies style cryptic riddle, like, the cat drinks milk at midnight to face the southern wall type thing. And it's really funny because in the end they just like have to say the word friend in Elven, which is like kind of Lord of the Rings making fun of itself a bit and being like, see, not everything has to be a crazy, complicated, convoluted explanation. Sometimes like you just should take things as they come and just accept that like not everything has to be crazy fantasy nonsense, right?
Yeah.
This feels like they went, oh yeah, that's a cool moment and a cool payoff for something that's been a part of the story for a while. But like you said, the dagger's pretty new. It's not been in the other 3 films. I don't get... Like, this setup could have worked, right? Like, imagine that there's a riddle that they somehow obtain that's written by somebody, and it's a riddle that involves an object we've seen before. Specifically what my brain immediately went to is, let's say that it's Luke's sword is somehow involved, right? Because his lightsaber has been a pretty central, like, part of these 3 films as far as, like, Rey's connection with him through the Force and stuff like that. Maybe it's some kind of puzzle that only a Force-sensitive user can solve, and the missing puzzle piece is you need to have Luke's sword, which we know was kind of out of hands during this period anyway. So, like, there are things you could do in the story that would immediately make this more resonant, where it could kind of tie back into the themes that they've already set up. It could feel a little bit less like a weird geometry puzzle, which I think is why it doesn't work. Because, like you said, I just think it was more mystical and magical, we would be weirdly finer with it. Like, it would need an explanation.
So I've actually had to start taking notes while you're talking because there are so many different things that I was thinking about. So one of them was we were initially talking about the purpose of the dagger and why Ochi could potentially have made it. And one thing that we had not mentioned was the possibility that he was leaving clues as insurance so he could blackmail Sidious, which I would think if you wanted to make life insurance that you would want to make it more obvious and less hard to find. But
but again, you're not going to forget where it is.
Yeah. But
yeah.
Technically this may be, and that brings me to the second point, which was you talking about how this may be one of the first places that anyone would look for this kind of stuff. And obviously someone did, because it kind of looked like the place has been ransacked with people coming in, taking the valuables and getting out. It's hard to tell whether that was the fact or whether it was just the destruction of the thing crashing into the water and all stuff being lost down in the water and all that. But one of the things that people always laugh about is that Luke was hidden on the first place that Anakin would theoretically look for him with his literal relatives. But it is also very logically the one place Anakin never wants to step foot on again. And you could say the same thing about the Emperor and this battle station, because it represents an extreme failure for him. So he would possibly never ever want to set foot in that throne room again, making it, just like with Luke, the best place you could ever possibly hide something you don't want him to find, which kind of might reinforce the idea that Ochi was using it as a safe place to hide something as a weapon against the Emperor.
That's a really interesting thought. I could see that. I mean, I certainly, if I fucked up a Death Star twice, which is like, you have a planet-killing starship and then you goof it once, then you're like, take 2, and you fuck it again, I'm with you. I would probably be like, yeah, I'm not revisiting that crashed car again. But like, the fact that he beefs the Death Star twice is like, yeah, that makes sense. And also, I'm now rewatching her going into the throne room, and she has to pass like some kind of a force trial thing as well, or there's like a ghost or something. Or no, she sees Dark Ray. That's right, because they need to sell toys. But she grabs the Wayfinder and she has to confront like her inner darkness or whatever. Is that her connecting to the remnants of Sidious's like kind of force presence? You know, like, because as you're saying, this place is imbued with significance for him, because we already know that like some geography will retain aspects of the Force users that have been there, and kind of like that's how you get like Force echoes and things like that. But it seems like it's not very well hidden even in that room. To your point about like, it looks like it's been ransacked. She opens a door that isn't locked and it's just right there. So like, it's not even. Do you know what I mean? I just... Well,
the frustration we have with that, right? I don't know if you've seen that all over the place, that if you go back and look at the exterior shots of that room, there's no door. There's no room there. That side room she goes into doesn't exist. It would have vented out into space. If you go back and look at this, like, the exterior of the battle station from episode 6.
Huh. I mean, I'm more okay with that. It's wreckage or whatever. It's fine.
Yeah, but it kind of might play into the idea that it would be kind of neat that that entire room could have been like a challenge by the Force, or like the whole thing didn't exist, so the whole premonition that she saw in there didn't exist, and so like if you pass the trial, then you get to come back with the Wayfinder in your hand.
I could see that, but Ochi's just a dude.
Yeah,
he doesn't have the Force.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is
And then why would the evil premonition be inside that room in the first place? Because that's not where Homeboy died. And
that's true.
I mean, this planet itself is not where Homeboy died. So like very little of it makes sense, although the idea is a really neat throwback. I mean, the old novels I remember reading talked about like when I think it was Leia who was like orbiting the Endor, and it was like every time that she passed the area in which Palpatine had actually died, she could like hear his echoes of screams in the Force.
That's cool.
And Mara Jade had the same thing. Like any Force user could feel it when they went close to there. It was a really neat thing, and this could have been a throwback to that, but I don't think they put that much thought into it.
No, but that's kind of the issue with this whole film, right? Is they took Trevorrow's script and they like hacked it to little bitty pieces, and then they just like grabbed aesthetics from it and went, that felt like Star Wars, that felt like Star Wars, and they kind of jammed it together. And in a very Abrams style, if you've read much about like the production of this film, basically it was made in the edit. They just shot a bunch of stuff and were like, hopefully this will work. And, we've all seen it. So like, not a great way to make a film. I'm reading someone's explanation of, so Ochi's only, I'm just going to read you this paragraph from Reddit user, Yoda _ Seagulls, which is a very good handle. Yoda Seagulls.
Said Seagulls gonna come, poke me in the coconut, and they did. And they did.
Ochi's only means of reaching Exegol, understandably a need-to-know location, was most likely through the Emperor's Wayfinder. Ochi started his mission by hunting down that Wayfinder, searching for it in the scattered debris of the second Death Star. When he finally found it resting in the Emperor's vault, he marked its exact coordinates on his dagger using Sith runes, a language that was banned from the galaxy. A dead language is the perfect failsafe if the dagger should ever fall into the wrong hands. In Rey's case, Luke's notes mentioned a clue/key was carried by Ochi that could lead to Exegol. So in a way, she knew what she was looking for, otherwise she or any other person wouldn't have gone through all the trouble of breaking the law to translate a worthless relic. So how did Luke know about Ochi and his dagger? And then it goes on to blah, 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 blah. There's a dumb explanation. But I don't think that Rey was worried about breaking the law. They are literally rebels on the run from a galactic empire. I don't think there was ever a point where any of our characters were like, doing the Sith language thing, super illegal, just like being they're not worried about getting like got by the space like secret police.
Plus that goes back to like her whole origin story. Like she literally grew up on a planet outside of the law. She doesn't know what the law is. It's just her slave masters and what they told her to do. She doesn't understand the concept of police or laws or anything like that unless she's learned it in the past 3 years while she's been a rebel and on the run from everyone. So like you said, like
bizarre.
Yeah.
Truly. But this seems to suggest that so this Jesus. So Okay. So this guy's explanation, I'm not going to read you the whole thing. Basically, this guy posits that I guess Ochi knew that he was supposed to track down Exegol. And so this is where it gets really much like, so does he hide the Wayfinder there himself, or does he track it down there, use it to go to Exegol, come back, and then put it back there? I think that's the implication. He like stashes it there for later. And then he jots down how to find it on this dagger in case he forgets, I guess. So let's talk about genre for a second, because I want to expand on the conversation we started in our last episode about Star Wars being a fantasy, not necessarily a sci-fi. And I wanted to delineate just between two concepts that I think bear mentioning here when it comes to what extent this dagger thing feels out of place. So I want to briefly touch on the concept of like internal and external genre. And so when we talk about story and character motivation, so like what is the emotional journey of these characters? What is the apparatus at play? That's internal genre. That's like, what is the narrative structure here? Is it a hero with 1,000 faces, hero's journey type thing? Is it a thriller? Is it a maturation, coming of age, buildings Roman? Internal genre is about the narrative structure of the character arcs, and usually the character arc of the protagonist most centrally. So like, what is happening to this protagonist? Is it in a thriller, right? They go from relative safety into danger. They face damnation, and they make a choice between mortality and damnation. It's like the obvious example of that is like Silence of the Lambs, which is like your classic thriller, where at the end, Clarice's choice is she has to put herself in mortal jeopardy to go and face the killer, or she faces the damnation of her soul of not doing anything, of agreeing to walk away from this problem. And that's like the crucial character shift in the thriller story. That is different and separate to external genre, which is like the set dressing. So when we talk about genre, there is a meaningful distinction between this thing is it has science fiction dressing on it. So it's got like, it looks like science fiction. And it could be a noir thriller. So like a classic example of that would be your Blade Runner, particularly 2049, which is like, it's this the external genre is like the cyberpunk and kind of sci-fi, this really gritty sci-fi aesthetic. Whereas the internal genre is that kind of coming of age, buildings Roman for Joe, our character, and also like disillusionment of reality as well. So they're not necessarily the same thing. When we talk about Star Wars being a fantasy, what we mean is that the story arcs within it and the internal genres tend to just be really standard, like coming of age fantasy structures, which is a character finds themselves in a position where they're living in an old world. There's some call to adventure. They initially reject it. When they do accept it, they go out, they explore, and they understand there are allies and there are foes. They overcome some challenges, and then they kind of have to change themselves in order to cross the threshold to win the day or to lose the day, whatever, it doesn't really matter which. Then they kind of return to a new world changed, right? Pretty standard fantasy fare. That's different than a sci-fi story, as, having sci-fi as your internal genre. Sci-fi stories tend to be a lot more about the nature of like humanity and machines. A pretty classic, like, for a really obvious contrast, the difference between the first Matrix film and the second two Matrix films is that the first Matrix film is like pretty straightforwardly like a coming of age, buildings Roman for Neo with sci-fi stuff on top of it. The second two are like pure science fiction, like to the point where like they fucking rock. And when you read those second two films as one film together as pure sci-fi, it just unlocks what they were trying to do there. But I guess, I think that distinction is important to make here, because when we talk about Star Wars being fantasy, we don't mean that there aren't sci-fi things in it, or there aren't sci-fi mechanisms and sci-fi world building. What we mean is like the story structures at play are most typically before the sequel trilogy, pure fantasy. To the extent where like the prequel trilogy. I was going to say the first three, but that gets confusing. The prequel trilogy. This is add this to the supercut of all the times I forget how Star Wars works. Somewhere out there, someone's making a list of all the times I forgot the names of the films. So in the prequel stories, those are like really high fantasy. Those are like some Lord of the Rings shit where it's like politics of like fantasy courtrooms and shit. And then by the kind of next one, you get into like the spaghetti western kind of version of fantasy, like your kind of Stephen King, McCormack's The Road type stuff. But yeah, I guess I wanted to elaborate on that a little bit because I think it bears discussion when it comes to this Dagger. Because a comment you made before that got me thinking about this, Darth, is the comment about the reason this feels weird to me is not the contrivance. And that was what I was trying to illustrate with the if this message was somehow crypted within some object and you needed the Force to unlock it or something, or it was some cool space riddle. Because we don't hear the riddle in a language we can understand, and because the solution to the puzzle is geometry, it doesn't feel like it fits within the larger apparatus of the story. It doesn't feel like a fantasy solution in the same way that in the Lord of the Rings example, when they say speak friend and enter, you kind of go like, oh, well, it's a magic door that the elves crafted for the dwarves kind of thing as a way to bring an alliance between their two people, and it was part of that old world. Like you can immediately run a connection back through to the setup of those films, which is like, hey, there was a time when all of these races came together. It's then not surprising that, hey, there's this elven door into these dwarven minds, and it's speak friend and enter, because at that time those races were really friendly. And you suddenly it suddenly just like all clicks into place. Your brain automatically explains it for you without too much like heavy lifting. Whereas with this, because it's geometry, you literally go, wait a minute, what if she was like you said before, 10 paces to the left? Because this isn't a sci-fi story where that kind of an answer should be the solution to a problem. Like, you can't imagine in the first story, if instead of Luke having to make this amazing shot into like the vent of the Death Star, that the way that they solve that was like, they do a bunch of mathematical equations and work out if they hit 27 places on the exterior of the Death Star simultaneously, it will explode. Like, that's kind of a sci-fi like explanation rather than a fantasy one of like, you got to make the cool shot, bullseye and womp rats with my T-18 type style, you know?
Yeah. So I had some interesting thoughts. The explanation that you just gave rang so true, and I'm trying to remember off the cuff what films that I've had this thought before, but sometimes I'll finish a film that, you know, the title says that it's a Western, or the title says that it's sci-fi or fantasy, and I'll finish it and I'll say, that didn't feel like sci-fi to me, or that didn't feel like a Western to me. Like, they may have had horses, and it you know, they may have been having a 6-shooter and having gunfights and wearing cowboy hats, but it didn't feel like a Western. And that's because of what you were talking about, was like the internal genre of what they were doing. Because like, I cannot imagine a Western ever having what we saw in Star Wars with like the Galactic Senate talking about the politics that make the universe work. Like,
right?
that doesn't fit in that genre whatsoever, but you could put it in there and technically classify it as a Western, but it wouldn't fit whatsoever. And what would make this dagger scene actually fit the genre that it's supposed to be is if, when they get to the cliffside, the dagger just shoots out of her hand and floats in the air because the Force is what's controlling it. That would have made so much... Well, it wouldn't have made sense like in the story to why the Force would do this, but at least it would have made sense in the overall scheme of, this is a fantasy and magic happens and we don't know why.
Yes, and we don't know why. And that's the crucial thing. Like, yeah, you're right. I mean, there are so many films that you come out of that way and you're like, oh, why was that? And it's when you start to pick up on it, it also changes the way that you read films. Like, I mean, for me, the one that really changed my life was that Matrix example when I was in university studying. And I was like saying to my professor at the time, one of my writing professors, I was like, man, I really don't like those second two Matrix films. Like, I just don't. They just don't. It's not, you know, it's not for me. I really like the first one. We were talking about it, and she goes, "Oh, listen, like you know, well, how are you viewing them?" And I was like, "Well, as sequels to the first one." She's like, "No, view them as like just like pure sci-fi. Like, watch them as if you're watching like an Asimov, like reading an Asimov book." And the second I did that, I was like, "Oh shit, these are rad as hell." Because like then they're just like sci-fi vehicles to explore philosophy, which is like, it's a cool idea.
Yeah, and so many people make that same argument against those films, but they've never been able to interpret why, and I've never been able to understand why, because they're like, the first one, it had so much. It's because we're watching Neo grow as a person. The second and third film, they don't have that development, like you said. It's like the internal genre is just so different that all of that growth we saw in the first one, it left us expecting that in the next two, and when we didn't get that,
he was just finished. He's like, "This is me now."
Yeah. Have you seen the fourth one, by the way?
I have. Yeah. We can't litigate that now, but listen. There was some good stuff. People are being way harsh on it. I had a really good time. I really like no spoilers, but I do like. There's a fight between two characters that I thought they did a really good job of reinterpreting. That everybody seemed to hate, which I've watched that fight now like 6 or 7 times back, and I'm like, this is fucking rad. It's rad. That's the fight for anybody who's seen it. The fight in the bathroom.
I was gonna say subway. It looks like either a subway or a bathroom. Subway to replicate the first film.
Because I also incidentally, can I tell a quick Matrix story? I have one connection to the Matrix. Is that all right?
Go for it.
So when I was growing up, my dad worked in Sydney, which is where they filmed all of those Matrix films, and he worked in a lot of the kind of high rises in the middle of the city. And when they shot any of the exterior shots you see of the Matrix is Sydney, or it's composite photography combined with Sydney. And those subways that you see in the Matrix are like actual train stations you can go to in Sydney. Like, I've been on those trains. It's fucking rad. But the other cool thing, this is my dad's anecdote, is he's going to work one morning, and basically like the way that a lot of these buildings are laid out is you have like a coffee shop in the lobby, and then you go to the elevators and you go up to the building. Pretty common. I don't know if that's like just an Australian thing, but it's basically every building here.
Yeah.
So you have to go through the coffee shop to get into the office building. And it's all roped off, and there are all of these like different people around. And my dad's like, I gotta get to my fucking office. And he's standing there for a while and just kind of like waiting. Like, and they've got cameras around, and there's this kind of thing happening. And eventually he's like, I just need to fucking go. I need to get to work. Like, I can't wait any longer. So he goes through what is a live set, walks through this scene that they're shooting for The Matrix, and Keanu Reeves is like, I guess they just shot or something, and he's sitting at the back, like, doing something or rather. And my dad like is walking past him, and Keanu Reeves says good morning, and my dad's like, yeah, good morning. Like, and he's like, what the fuck is going on here? And Keanu really politely explains like, oh, we're shooting a film here. And my dad's like, this is incredibly inconvenient for me. I'm trying to get into my office, and Keanu's like super apologetic, and like the security guards are like lingering in the background, being like, we're gonna have to snatch this motherfucker. And Keanu like apologizes, and then my dad goes up to his office, and whenever he tells that story, it's so funny to me that like Keanu's just like, real sorry about that, man. Like, just so apologetic. And my dad's like being an irate like business person, which is so not him either. It's just very funny to me. But that's my Matrix connection. So there you go.
It's so funny because like from everything that I've heard about Keanu, like he would stop production and personally escort your dad up to his office because that's the kind of man he is. Yeah.
But like my dad doesn't know who the fuck this guy is or what the Matrix are yet. Like they haven't made any of them, which is very funny. It's also it's hilarious to me that at that point in his career, my dad doesn't know who Keanu Reeves is.
Because he had done like the other films, right?
Speed and shit, right?
Yeah.
He's famous by that point, and my dad's like la da 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 da. Like, especially because my dad's a giant film nerd. That's the weirdest part of that story. But yeah, with that we can talk about Matrix here. Maybe we'll do a bonus episode where we'll talk about Matrix. But I guess what I was getting at with that sort of side. Explanation of the genre thing is I think it bears mentioning here that because the way that the Force works is we don't need to really get exactly what's going on as long as it feels coherent with the way the Force has worked previously. It's the same reason that when Kylo Ren freezes a blaster bolt, you go, oh, that's fucking cool. But then when Rey does lightning, you're like, what? There is for some reason a meaningful difference where one of them you're like, yeah, cool, awesome. That feels like a natural evolution. And then Rey like lightninging the cruiser. That's in this film, right?
Yeah.
She lightnings. Wait, is that the cruiser where she thinks
Chewie's on
Chewbacca's in?
Yeah.
That's real fucked up. Anyway, it's really fucked up, Rey. She accidentally lightnings this cruiser, and I do recall that this again. One of the few things I remember about this movie is in the cinema thinking that was an odd choice. Because we've never seen the Force really work that way before. It's always had to be like people are making deliberate choices to utilize this tool and utilize this magic in particular ways. Like Anakin, when he's doing his thing in the prequels, he's not like accidentally doing Force stuff when he's frustrated. He's deliberately picking up pears and shit. Like there is a deliberateness to the way that magic seems to work. But then here in that moment, you're like, but we've never seen anything happen just like out of frustration before. Even with Kylo Ren, see, this is the thing. Even with Kylo Ren, when he gets miffed off, he's not like force doing stuff. He's hitting consoles with his sword like a child. Like there's no sort of, it's not an expected function of that magic. And I'd say magic system in the loosest sense. So yeah, you're right. If the dagger had like, if you get to the spot, if you follow the riddle to the spot and the dagger does something and then you follow the dagger or whatever, like tight, awesome. Or maybe, I don't know, it's speculation.
Well, it's interesting because that's kind of a throwback to some of the old novels where they'll describe that you don't know a kid is actually like force sensitive until he gets angry, and then in that anger he causes stuff to happen. Ryan Johnson's last movie that I'm blanking on the name, Jumper, not Jumper.
Yeah. No, that's not Ryan Johnson. No, Jumper's. Which movie are you thinking of?
With the angry little kid, and it's a time travel thing. The shotguns, you go back in time with a shotgun.
Lupo.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah.
So like with that one, like the kid never shows any powers at all unless he's really angry, right?
Yeah, right.
And let's see, also in The Magicians, when Quentin goes in to have his test, like he can't do anything until they really piss him off, and then he like blows their minds with all the magic that he just throws out of nowhere, but he didn't have a clue how he's doing anything. And that's part of the, I don't know how true that should be, but that's part of kind of like the mythos of young amateur magicians, is that across all of these different genres, when you don't know how to do something, anger lets you do the thing, and it tends to be really, really strong when you do the thing. That seems to be pretty darn consistent. But it's really interesting what you were describing was that something I always thought had been something I didn't like was I always thought we needed to know how the Force worked in every little way for it to make sense to us. But based off your description, what I realize now is all I need is consistency. I don't need to know how Kylo Ren is necessarily stopping the laser in midair. I don't know how he was, I don't need to know how he was trained to do that. I just need to know that everyone can do that, and it will look remotely the same between all these different people. We just need the consistency between all of these different characters across all of these films, and that lack of consistency makes me think, oh, we need more defined rules for how the Force works, but it's not. We need more defined rules for how it's portrayed consistently.
Or that's where it gets really tricky, right? Because it's a soft magic system. It's kind of like the example I always point to as a really easy analog is in the Harry Potter books. There is a point where they stop becoming fairy tale. They stop being written in the fairy tale genre, and very few people think of fairy tale as a specific genre, but it is. The fourth book in that series, I'm talking specifically about the books here, not necessarily the films. The fourth book in that series is where it stops becoming. They stop being written in the fairy tale genre, and then each book is a Harry Potter. Each book's external genre is Harry Potter. And then the internal genres become other things. So the fourth Harry Potter book is a sports story. It's a sports tournament story, written in the Harry Potter wrapper, right? And one of the things that starts to happen as Harry Potter, I'm doing air quotes for those just listening to the audio. One thing that starts to happen when you're writing these other genres within the larger genre you've created. So imagine instead of us describing the sci-fi as Star Wars as sci-fi, we said this is specifically Star Wars' version of sci-fi. When you start to have other genres in there, sometimes you run into this issue where you'll then feel an urge, like you're saying, to like need things to be explained. And the Harry Potter books really fucking tie themselves into just the craziest fucking corners, trying to explain like, how does the spell system work? How do Horcruxes work? Let's explain time turners, and everything needs to have an explanation. You need to, J.K. Rowling is suddenly tweeting about what wizards used to do with their shit. Like it's like the Ouroboros, right? It's like the snake eating its own tail at a certain point. The trick and the real difficulty when you see it done masterfully, it is unbelievable. The trick is to know exactly how much to provide and in what context. And it's something that like I struggle with in my own fiction all the time. Like I've just been back and forthing it on with the draft at the moment for my third book of like, if you give slightly too much definition to something that should by nature be mystical, you can't, like there's something our brains do where we then try and like find holes in it, or we try and find an explanation because we need to. Humans are like that. We're just like, tell me all of the things. But yeah, you're right. I think maybe with the Force, I guess the one thing I would say, because I completely agree with the slight modification that yes, it needs to be consistent across all of the characters, unless there is a meaningful reason why some larger set of characters can do different things. The example I'm thinking of there is Force lightning, where it's like there's a reason why the goodies don't do lightning, and there's a reason why the baddies can do lightning. That's like there's a meaningful narrative reason for that, rather than like a world building one. Like the reason there is no ontological fact in those stories that say you can only use lightning if you train this way and you do these things. It's like, no, you just have to like channel the dark part of your personality and the dark part of the Force or whatever.
Yeah, it's like exactly the three forbidden curses in Harry Potter. It's like you do not use these things unless you want to actively hurt someone, and a Jedi should not ever actively hurt someone. It's not that you can't do it. It's just that it is forbidden in that culture of, you know, the good guy.
It's a narrative utility.
Yeah. And it was
I hadn't thought about the three spells. Why would you never just not use the killing curse though? That's another problem that you end up writing yourself into. It's like, why do the Death Eaters ever use a different spell other than Avada Kedavra? And the answer is they don't. And it makes it really boring to watch them do stuff.
Which the only problem, which it would have been so easy to write her way around this, is don't make it unblockable.
Don't have a killing curse. Like, because here's the thing that's... I'm going to get mad about Harry Potter. I find Harry Potter so endlessly frustrating. Because, like, here's the thing. You know what's a really cool and interesting thing about Harry Potter if you don't have the killing curse? Is that all of these wizards have to work out how to use other spells to kill people if they want to do that. Like, you have to use, like, the spell that like creates a rope and then you hang someone with the noose or whatever, or you do like the fire spell and you try and immolate someone, or like just the suddenly every duel is really engaging because like you don't know how this person is going to try and creatively pull something out of the hat. Like instead it's just like, it's just guns. One's just become guns. Like that's at the end of the day, like by the sixth one, like a wand is just a wooden gun, and like that's not interesting to watch.
It's kind of an interesting. It's an interesting analogy because it's like the people that went from. It reminds me of like The Last Samurai. It was like you're going from the art of using swords and having to figure out you have to artfully use the weapon to defeat your opponent doing something they haven't seen before, versus them just pulling out a cannon and blowing you apart, which is what Avada Kedavra is. It's like she made the killing curse to. I assume that it's just a mechanism to display like this is a really bad person because it's so forbidden to do this thing. But like you said, it just is such an easy out to so many battles, and the fact that it's unblockable it makes it even worse. It's like not using it is one thing, but not using it when it can't be blocked is a completely different.
Also, that's how this film ends, incidentally, is like instead of, hey, what has Rey learned about sword fighting and being a Jedi and stuff? It's just like, big Force lightning battle. Do the thing. Just, yeah. It's like, fuck, this film literally ends the same way as Harry Potter. That's crazy. That's crazy. J.J. Abrams, what are you doing, buddy? What are you doing, buddy? Fuck that. Oh my, I've never thought about that.
Yeah, I hadn't either.
When you do the edit, Darth, can we just see those side by side? Because it's like the same shit. It's like, do the magic connectivity thing, and then the ghosts of your ancestors come in and they help you out.
Yep.
Holy shit.
What was original in this film?
Scorsese was right. Cinema is dead. Fuck me. Yeah. Okay. Really quickly, I have to ask you two things about this dagger before we wrap up. First of all, would you, if someone was selling a replica of this knife, would you own it and hang it on your wall? Actually, those are two separate questions. Would you purchase it just to have this piece of cinematic history, and then would you proudly display it in your home? Okay.
There are two reasons why I would in fact purchase it. Maybe 10% because it is a cool looking little prop and I like knives and I would like displaying that cool looking knife on my wall. But the other 90% is because I really like having visual reminders of things. And that knife is a very solid visual reminder that at the very least, to me, it's a reminder that when you are building a story, that you got to think through all these stupid little details that you might not even care about at the time, because everyone's going to come back and look at them later, and you better have a solid foundation for what you're doing, because that knife just represents stupidity. Like, if I had a nameplate for that knife, it would just be stupidity.
I have good news for you. I'm going to pop a link to an image in the chat. This is going to mess up your recording real quick, but grab yourself a little scoop of that. Keep your eyes on that little bad boy. A reminder of failure is a very funny sentence. I also just want to call out that Darth just said he was really into knives. I don't know what that means, but that seems like that should be a red flag. I don't know about all y'all. I'm not sure I want my friends being like, I'm actually really getting into knives lately. Like, what does that mean? There are, just in case anyone's wondering, for about $30 US, you can absolutely get a copy of this fucking knife. Which I might now need to do, I think.
It would have been really poignant if I had actually had my butterfly knife, which is usually sitting right beside me, but it's a few feet away, so I can't reach it right now. But
I think America was a mistake.
I was just about to say that, darn Americans.
That's very, very funny. Okay, so good news. You can absolutely buy a copy of this knife.
Okay.
Oh my god, there's a YouTube video about how to make Ochi's blade from Star Wars. Fuck yeah. It's 3 minutes 30. I bet you it's just 3D print. This is ridiculous. It's just a time lapse of the 3D printer printing it.
It'd be funny if that's how Ochi actually made it. Like, he just went out, took a 3D printer to the cliffside, and just made the dagger right then and there.
They must have those in Star Wars, right?
You gotta think, but that also branches over more into sci-fi than Star Wars really is.
That's more like a Star Trek thing.
Yeah, I could definitely see that in Trek or any of the other like crappy sci-fi films that you might see on Netflix or whatever.
I mean, Star Trek has the what's it called? The replicator? Yeah, where they can just make anything they want.
Yeah, for food. Yeah.
Yeah, which again, like as far as genre goes, meaningful distinction there, right? Like it's, oh my god, this guy is like weathering the knife. Like he's 3D printed it and now he's got like a little iron file and he's like scuffing it up so it looks ancient and used. This is a lot of effort for a really bad knife that's bad and shouldn't exist. I know he's spray painting it after he's scuffed it up and then he's sanding. This is a lot of work.
You know, something we didn't even mention about the knife and showing that picture reminded me was the fact that the little protractor that comes out of the knife, like none of this worked if she didn't look at it and was like, hey, I wonder if any part of this comes out of the like.
It's also you gotta wonder, did he craft when he made it, like when he forged this dagger in the metalworks a city block away from the crash of the Death Star, did he craft the protractor when he made it, or did he add that later? Like, you know what I mean? Because that's the bit that I'm wondering about. Okay, this guy, now that I'm seeing him put it together, the way that he's constructed it, you would have to have the protractor made with the dagger. Like, you couldn't have done it separately. The handle has to be hollow for this to work.
Yeah.
It's so much work. Good lord. Yeah, okay. I'm now just captivated by watching this guy make a knife. I'm gonna have to turn that off because it's very distracting. He's doing so much effort, Darth. Holy crap, it looks legitimately like a fucking... You know, this does occur to me that means that someone in a prop department... Oh my god, someone in the prop department for Industrial Light and Magic had to make... The guys who've done, like Lord of the Rings and like all the other Star Wars films. Like the guys who've made some of the best props, prosthetics, and films in history. Somebody at a certain point during the production of this film got a ticket put on their like GitLab board that said, make Ochi's knife. And they read the description of the knife and what it does, and they went, I guess I have to make that now. That's gotta be a rough day. Like, that's gotta be tough after being like, we handcrafted the model of the Death Star. We painted each section. Every single ship that you see in the prequel, like in The Phantom Menace, they're all miniatures that are individually made by specific human. And then someone's like, yeah, the knife has a retractable protractor in it, and it's a Goonies knife. That's a rough day for that whoever made that knife. If you made this knife and you're watching this video right now, or you're listening to this fucking podcast right now, if you made this knife, you need to write in and let us know. You need to tell us your story. I need to hear from you if you made this goddamn knife, because somebody did. Duh.
When we were initially talking about this, you said that you had thought that the director here had pulled this off in a couple other films as well, because he just apparently really liked this Goonies, thing. Of
Abrams is like obsessed with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Do you have any idea what other films that he had been?
Yeah. In the Star Trek, the third Star Trek that he did. What's it called? He was a producer on it. Star Trek.
I know Into Darkness was one of them, but
Star Trek Beyond, I think, which is actually quite a good film. I really like that film. It's because Abrams didn't direct it, but there are like 3 moments of Goonie shit in that where like you look at a particular landscape at a particular angle and a character's like, aha, this thing. But hang on, I did write down a list somewhere. The Goonies moments. That because it, yeah. I can't find my list, but yeah, Abrams does this a lot. The reason this happens to Abrams a lot is that he does a lot of these sort of mystery box stories. And the thing with the mystery box story is that the way that you solve it tends to be quite contrived a lot of the time, because it has to be like, how did nobody else figure this out before now? Oh, it's fucking Lost is what I was thinking of. That's the one. Lost is an entire show of this. Lost is an entire show of this object is meaningless unless you're standing in this particular spot when the sun is at this particular angle with it, once you've thought about these particular things. I love Lost, but like it is literally just that whole show. Equally, like a lot of the work that Abrams has done on, what else have we got here? Star Trek, Star Wars, Lizzie's Story. Yeah, less so. Westworld. Westworld is all this shit. Yeah, there's a big pattern. If you aren't familiar with Abrams' work, I definitely recommend like jumping back in and getting involved in some of his older stuff, because a lot of it's really cool, and so much of it it's just this. Like it's this over and over again, just endlessly on loop. Super 8 is full of this shit. Super 8 is in fact his version of the Goonies. If you haven't seen that, definitely check that out. Yeah, there's a long list, but I think the key ones there are any of his work on Star Trek, and yeah, pretty much the entirety of Lost is it's all Goonie shit. And I guess it's because, he grew up with Spielberg and the Goonies and like that era, and it seems really cool, but if deployed incorrectly, you end up with scenes like this where rather than it feeling like a really interesting payoff to something that's been set up, you end up having to invent a knife that feels ancient, that is 13 years old, that has a hidden protractor in it, and that's just rough. Like that's just rough, man. You know what I mean? It's bad out here. What a fucking dumb knife.
And there's the teaser. But no, something I definitely want to talk about at another point, because this was just fascinating. I love watching like those really crappy movies, those really crappy sci-fi movies on Netflix.